Young people have lived most of our lives under Tory governments that inflict austerity on our communities, scapegoat migrants, and fuel the climate crisis.
Now we face another recession, soaring unemployment, and a pandemic out of control.
We don't just need the Labour Party to win the next election. We need a party that will end these crises, end these cruel policies, and build a better society.
We need policy as radical as reality, not half measures or piecemeal reforms.
Only socialism can address this failing system head on and put an end to crisis and insecurity.
This means embracing Black Lives Matter, not dismissing it.
It means taking back the wealth and power that working people have built.
It means abolishing tuition fees and making education free and accessible cradle to grave.
It means a Green New Deal that puts power in the hands of workers.
It means bringing mail, rail, energy and water into democratic public ownership.
It means opposing Tory legislation that decriminalises war crimes and torture and not abstaining.
Because Labour won't win by going soft on the Tories.
We won't win by turning our back on the trade union movement that built our party.
We won't win by returning to the days of abstaining on a hostile environment, on Tory welfare cuts, or on austerity.
We won't win by embracing imperialism, racist policing, or transphobic rhetoric.
Labour wins when we take on the billionaire class and the political establishment and show that together we can transform society in the interests of working people.
We're going to build a young Labour that works towards this.
A young Labour that's a campaigning presence in our communities, winning power at the ballot box and on the picket line.
A young Labour that organises young people in their trade unions.
Mobilises young people behind the Black Lives Matter movement.
To fight for trans rights.
To fight for climate justice.
Fight against evictions and extortionate rents.
Young Labour has one job: to fight for a socialist future, and we are the people to do it.
Welcome everyone. This is really great to see so many of you on here at our rally for a socialist future. We're really excited today to be joined by some titans of our movement. So we've got Apsana Begum MP, Zara Sultana MP, Owen Jones and Lauren Townsend, along with some brilliant candidates standing in these young Labour elections. At a time of uncertainty and unprecedented struggles facing young people, these elections are more important than ever. We need a young Labour that's prepared to champion the causes of young people and fight for a socialist future. Remember, all members of the Labour Party under 27 will receive their ballot to vote from tomorrow. Make sure you keep an eye out, tweet support with the hashtag for a socialist future and get in touch with other young members to vote for our brilliant candidates. This call is to bring young Labour members together and support one another during this crisis. So we want to hear from you in the chat on the left-hand side. So let's get started. Firstly, I'd like to introduce our candidate for Chair of Young Labour, councillor and youth worker Jess Barnard, to lay out her vision for a socialist young Labour.
Thanks, Daisy, and thanks everyone for joining us today. It's great to see so many people on the call. And like Daisy said, we've got just one day until ballots drop, so keep an eye on your emails, and I hope that if you stand with us, vote for a Socialist Future slate. So a little bit about our platform. So as young people, we often hear the phrase that we are in the deepest recession in history. But if there's one thing we know from beer experience of 2008, is that we are not all in this together. The coming crisis is going to continue to hit young people particularly hard. Youth unemployment is expected to reach 1 million by the end of the year. And workers under the age of 25 are 3 times more likely to face job losses. We've seen the way that the Tory party are willing to exploit students, putting their health, well-being and education at risk to make a profit for their billionaire landlord mates. And young people, once again, are going to bear the brunt of an economic crisis. So now more than ever, we need a movement to organise against the injustices that young people face, from tackling institutional racism to demanding an end to a private rental sector that exploits and profits off young people. We need change. And that's where Young Labour has to come in, because we have to speak up for our generation, and we can't be neutral on issues of social justice and economic failures bigger than we have ever seen. For a socialist future slate are the people to lead this fight back, and I couldn't be prouder to be standing for election alongside a group of committed, experienced socialist young campaigners. We want to build a Young Labour where young members are empowered to stand up for social justice and organise in their local communities, whether that be a target seat for Labour or not. one that represents the diversity of our movement, that shows solidarity with those facing oppression around the world, and one that is relentless in its commitment to building a better society. Throughout this campaign, we've spoken to hundreds of young members across the UK to create a manifesto that captures the voice of our young members and a vision for the future of our youth wing and our party. It's clear from what we've heard that this vision is one where young Labour is at the heart of movements for social justice, for environmental justice, and for racial justice. We need a party that trusts our young members with the resources and autonomy to create real change in their communities. And that's exactly what we want to deliver. We'll work tirelessly to deliver a Labour government that is committed to transforming the lives of millions and building a new system that works for people and planet and not for profit. We stand with renters' rights, not landlords' profits, and the scale of the housing crisis that we see must be met with immediate collective action. We will build a young renters network to support collective action by tenants' unions at the forefront of taking on exploitative landlords. And we'll continue Young Labour's fight for a housing policy which demands a socialist solution to the crisis, including mass council house building, cancelling COVID rent debt, introducing rent caps, and putting our rights at the top of the agenda. We are committed to delivering a comprehensive political education programme, one for young members that creates a financial support scheme too, to ensure that young members on low incomes never face financial barriers to their political involvement. We will continue our work in delivering a truly democratic student youth wing, delivering autonomy and resources to local student societies, ensuring our youth wing never again shuts out activists for factional gains, and ensures that Young Labour is a space where we encourage participation and activism. Our youth wing will push for an ethical foreign policy based on an opposition to imperialism, a belief in democratic sovereignty, and a commitment to a genuine human rights agenda. As candidate for chair, I'm proudly supported by Unite, GMB, CWU, the Bakers Union, ASLEF, TSSA, and the FBU, and the only candidate for chair to be endorsed by trade unions. I firmly believe that there is no path to power that doesn't run through our trade unions. And that's why the Labour Party and Young Labour must continue to commit to its support for trade union movements. The Labour Party is the political arm of the trade union movement. We must always stand with workers taking industrial action for their rights at a time when this system puts profit before people and before their health. So as a first step, we will run a Young Workers Conference to put young workers at the heart of our youth wing. We'll support efforts to unionise young workers, and we'll make sure that we look at precarious low-paid industries and equip our members against the coming youth unemployment crisis. We will fight for international climate justice, working to deliver a socialist Green New Deal and standing shoulder to shoulder with climate campaigners, such as school strikers, to demand transformative action, while building international solidarity with climate movements around the world, and in particular, those in the global south facing the effects of climate change today. We will take the safeguarding of our young activists seriously, lobbying for regional named safeguarding leads for our young members and a complaint system that is fit for purpose. Young Labour must be open, inclusive and accessible. We must be better than the examples demonstrated by our National Party, and as a committee we will lead by example, practising these socialist values in the spirit of comradeship. We will unequivocally throw Young Labour's campaigning force of our membership behind movements for justice, wherever that may be, whether that be rent strikes, Black Lives Matter or trans rights campaigns. For the future of our generation, we'll ensure the Labour Party maintains a commitment to a green industrial revolution with well-paid green jobs and a net zero carbon neutrality target of 2030 to combat the climate crisis. And finally, we will ensure that the voice of young people is championed across the party, from policy making in Labour manifestos to ending the hostility that young members face in CLPs. We will ensure that the true potential of our young members is realised, because young members are not just doorstep fodder. They are our key workers, our policy makers, our carers, our trade unionists, our community organisers, and so much more. For a socialist future will ensure that Young Labour is a space that champions the voice of young people, nurtures engagement, and builds movements for change in every community. And that's why I, along with the Socialist Future Slate, are proud to stand on this platform of transformational socialist politics and a commitment to delivering a youth wing that stands shoulder to shoulder with young people. So tomorrow, on October the 19th, check your emails and make sure that you stand with us and vote for a socialist future.
Thanks, Jess. That was really, really excellent. I'm so excited about the platform we're standing on, and I think everyone else is too. It's really great to see so many people on here. We've got over 250 people watching at the minute, and it's still going up. So thank you so much all for coming. Now, I'm thrilled to be able to introduce the MP for Coventry South, the incredible Zara Sultana. Zara is a long-standing friend of Young Labour, previously representing her region on the National Committee. She's going to talk to us about the fight back against the Tories and how Socialist MPs in Parliament are demanding better for young people.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Daisy. Hi, everyone. My name is Zara Sultana. I'm the Labour Member of Parliament for Coventry South, and it's great to be able to join you this evening. And I'm really pleased to be backing this incredible slate of candidates. A couple of years ago, it would have been me on the other side as a candidate for the Young Labour National Committee. So I'm really excited to be here today. I actually am still technically Young Labour. I turned 27 at the end of the month. So I'm just about able to vote for this incredible slate, and I'll be doing so as soon as that ballot drops. And I encourage everyone else to do the same. And we really do need a socialist future. I think that goes without saying. From the crises we face, such as inequality and poverty, to COVID-19 and climate change, they're all caused and exacerbated by capitalism. It's capitalism that puts power and wealth in the hands of a tiny minority, letting bosses exploit workers and landlords live off the labour of workers, while working people have their hopes and potentials criminally constrained. It's capitalism that puts profit before people, even as a virus rips through our society. And it's a little surprise that this Thatcherite government has used this pandemic to hand out contracts worth millions and billions of pounds to friends and donors, lining the pockets of the rich, even when that leads us to having one of the deepest recessions of any wealthy country and the highest excess death toll in Europe. And it's capitalism that's driving the climate crisis, with fossil fuel companies pumping out carbon and trashing our planet in their pursuit of private profit. And while this all happens, while living standards plummet and working people suffer, this Tory government still finds the opportunities to scapegoat minorities, to distract and divide. During the summer, one of their MPs blamed Muslims for the spike in cases. Matt Hancock has, of course, blamed young people, and we saw Priti Patel spend weeks of this summer trying to distract us with a supposed migrant crisis. And this government is taking us down a dark and dangerous path. In the last few weeks, they have proposed the effective decriminalisation of torture for British soldiers overseas, shipping asylum seekers over 4,000 miles away to Ascension Island, banning anti-capitalist teacher materials in our schools, and of course there's the Covert Human Intelligence Sources Bill, or Spy Cops even, which would give undercover state agents a license to murder, torture, and commit sexual violence. And like I said in Parliament, I believe we have to take this descent into authoritarianism incredibly seriously. It's not just a distraction tactic. We are seeing concrete legislation being brought in on a weekly basis that grossly enhances the powers of the state and undermines our collective civil liberties. And that's why I joined comrades from the Socialist campaign group in voting against the Spy Cops bill last week. This is what we're up against, a system that's unfair, unjust, irrational, callous and cruel. A government that isn't just incompetent, I think that's letting them off quite lightly, but deeply dangerous. It's our class and young people, especially being hit hardest by all of this, whether it's in the broken housing system, in the marketized higher education system, in the mental health crisis, or in precarious and low-paid work. And that's why we have to be abundantly clear that tweaking the system isn't enough. Plastic straws aren't going to save us, nor are management consultants who don't have the answer. We don't just need a better version of the status quo or more competent management of the current social order. We need bold, radical answers. We need socialist answers. In this crisis, we've seen the damage of austerity and the gutting of our public services. So let's never, ever let that happen again. We've seen how privatization enriches the few and robs the rest. So let's end it and kick out Serco out of services for good. We've seen that it's not millionaire bankers that we need in a crisis. It's our nurses, our teachers, our cleaners, our shop assistants, our bus drivers and taxi drivers. It's the working class in all of our rich diversity. So let's build a society run by and for them. Of course, this isn't going to be handed down to us. It's not going to be put on a plate. We only get things by fighting for them, by organising in our communities, in our workplaces, and yes, in our Labour Party. That's why it's crucial that we get behind people who are prepared to meet the challenges we face with answers that match their scale. That's the only way we're going to get the socialist future that we deserve. So good luck to the candidates standing, and solidarity.
Thanks, Zara. That was really, really incredible, as all your speeches are at the moment. So next up, we actually have a slight change of schedule. We're going to be bringing in Shannon next. So Shannon is our candidate for the representative on in the Eastern region. So Shannon is going to be talking about her experiences within her upbringing and within the Labour Party, and kind of why she's standing and what it is that inspires us to kind of dedicate our time to doing this. So yeah, over to you, Shannon.
Here we go. I was going to say Zara is an incredibly tough act to follow, but I think she goes to show how important it is to get strong socialist voices elected to the Young Labour National Committee, because she is doing such a brilliant job in Parliament at the moment and is without a doubt one of my favourite MPs. So thanks so much for joining us tonight, Zara. So a bit about me. I am running, obviously, as Eastern Rep for the National Committee elections. I currently live in Harlow. I'm a proud Essex gal. I'm a councillor here and chair of my local Young Labour group, as well as sitting upon they've changed the name recently, the Eastern Regional Executive Committee. It used to be the Regional Board. So I feel like I know the region pretty inside out. I know the struggles it faces. I obviously know how difficult it can be to organise within the region, and I also know the deprivation across the region. So I myself, I know I just said I'm a proud Essex girl, but I was actually born in London, in Leytonstone, but I moved to Harlow when I was quite young, and my first kind of Harlow experience was I lived in a women's refuge for a kind of good chunk of my upbringing. And at the moment, obviously, with funding cuts, there's such few refuge spaces at the moment, and obviously such a lack of council housing. We were very lucky to move on to a council house after our little stint in a refuge. I live with my mum and my sister. My mum's amazing, super hard working, but obviously there's a lot of struggles when you're a single mum raising 2 kids in an area that you're relatively new to. And in Harlow, we've recently seen the rise of permitted developments. There's been programs online, it's made national news. So this is the reality for so many families in Harlow at the moment. They don't get council housing. They have to live in these kind of matchbox rooms and make it work, which is almost near impossible, the way some of these people have to live. So one thing that I think is so important that Young Labour fights for is good, safe, secure housing and more council housing. That is a policy that we must commit to, and we must always, always be building more council housing because it's so integral. One of the things growing up that really massively impacted me positively, and was actually when I first got elected, was what I gave my maiden speech on in the council chamber, was the libraries. I spent so much of my childhood in the libraries, and I think it really helped my mum out because we could go there after school whilst my mum finished work. She didn't have to worry about where we are. We were safe. We got help with our homework. And at the moment across Essex, they are trying to close a good chunk of the libraries down, and there's been a really, really good campaign throughout Essex, the Save Our Libraries Essex, so which I've kind of been involved in. It's kind of a non-political thing, but I've been quite involved in that, and it's been really, really great to see how much of an impact that libraries have on young people. I ended up doing an English literature degree, I think, because my love for reading and libraries was spent. But, you know, for children that come from families that don't have internet access, don't have computers, especially in this kind of virtual world now, there's so many barriers for them. And if we take away that access, obviously, it really, really does make a horrible difference. So that's one thing that we always need to fight on. There's so many different things, obviously, I care about. I think one thing is getting young working class voices in the party and hearing young working class people speak about their beliefs, kind of speak about what they stand up. And one thing that really frustrates me, being a working class person from a town like Harlow, is that working class people don't care about liberation issues. And I know this is a solid slate that is really, really on it with liberation issues, and I'm really proud to stand alongside some really brilliant comrades in our movement to fight for a socialist future. At the moment, obviously, we're in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic. So many young people are losing their jobs. I lost my job a few months ago. Luckily, I was one of the lucky ones who's managed to find work again. But there's so many young people now that either can't move out of home because they can't afford it, or they are private renting it and they're so worried about their circumstances. And as a private renter myself, I know how precarious it can feel like. Even a few months ago, we weren't sure what's happening with our contract. And I think when you're trying to get on with your life, when you're trying to find jobs, it's the thing you need the most, I think, secure housing. So that is one thing that we want to fight for. I would advise everyone to join their trade union. I would advise everyone to join a renters union if you do rent. And I know this is going to be a prime kind of thing that this committee campaigns on, is making sure that we work with our unions across the board and make Young Labour a proper campaigning force. So get involved, join your unions. So I am obviously really happy to be here with the For a Socialist Future slate. I really believe that young people can steer the direction of this party. I believe that young people are the ones, it's their future, so we need to make sure that we're providing a good future for them. So I think over the past few years, I think my struggles have made me realise, giving me the kind of energy and giving me the edge to fight for what's right. And it's so easy to admit defeat sometimes, but at the end of the day, the Labour movement is our movement. We need to be the ones that are kind of telling it where to go, basically. And I know this committee, without a doubt, will achieve that. So we need to build a better world, and it's not going to happen overnight. But we need to remember why we do this and why everything's so important. And like I said, I'll reiterate it again, I'm so proud to be standing on such a good platform with a bunch of brilliant working class socialists. And yeah, there we go.
So I think we're going to pass straight over on to Nabeela now, who's going to just tell us kind of what we have to do over the next few days. Obviously, ballots drop tomorrow, so she's just going to kind of let you know what needs to happen over the next couple of days. So you can just pass straight over to her.
Thanks so much, Shannon, and I'm so excited to be working with you. My name is Nabeela Mowlana, and I'm standing to be one of your student representatives alongside the brilliant Michaela and Fraser. So tomorrow you will receive an email from Labour outlining how to vote in the Young Labour elections. So every young member will get the chance to vote for a chair candidate, an international candidate, a regional rep, and if you're under 18, an under 18 rep. If you're registered with the party as a student, you will get 3 votes to elect 3 student reps. So make sure you get your vote in as soon as possible. Tweet your support using the hashtag #ForASocialistFuture. It's the one that should just pop up on the screen now. And let 3 friends know about our campaign and get them to vote too. Our next speaker will be talking about our landmark policy of the last election and why young members are leading the fight for climate justice. It's someone I'm incredibly proud to call a comrade, the incredible Townsend.
Thank you very much, Nabeela. I think I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me? Perfect. Okay, I'm going to kick straight off with that landmark manifesto policy that Nabeela just talked about. And I'm just going to go over some of the top lines. So at the last election, Labour went forward with a manifesto that was promising to launch a national transformation fund to invest 250 billion by 2030 in green industry and in tackling climate change. We pledged to create 1 million green jobs and 886,000 climate apprenticeships in the transition to a low carbon economy. We pledged to introduce a national education service with lifelong education access to help reskill people for the low carbon economy. We were going to empower local councils to take bus services into public ownership. We were going to return the railways to public ownership to control soaring fares and accelerate the transition to a zero carbon rail system. We were going to immediately introduce free bus travel for under 25s and ensure that all new vehicle sales were electric vehicles by 2030. We had a warm homes for all policy where we were going to retrofit the UK's entire housing stock. That's nearly 27 million homes by 2030. This would reduce energy bills by over £400 a year for 9.6 million low-income households and help to eradicate food poverty. We had a People's Energy Plan to create 37 new offshore wind farms with 51% public ownership. And we were going to directly reinvest profits, 20% in the coastal communities which hosted the wind farms and 80% in the energy transition and climate action movement. We were going to permanently ban fracking. We were going to introduce a just transition tax on oil companies. We were going to bring the national grid and supply arms of the big six into public ownership. We were going to fit buildings with solar panels, enough to cover 22,000 football pitches, including 1 million social homes. We were going to introduce a right to food to end soaring food bank use, whilst ensuring everyone has access to healthy, nutritious and sustainably produced food. And we were going to end support for fossil fuel production through aid spending and UK export finance and redirect it to clean, renewable energy investments. And that's just a few of the headlines. Like, I've got like 3 pages here of green policies that we had in our last manifesto, and I don't have enough time to run through them all. So we have to remember, it can feel a bit low at the minute. It can feel like we're in a really hard place, but the last few years have been a success and we must not forget that. We had a movement built and inspired by a leadership with a difference, a leadership that was principled, compassionate and completely impossible to be bought by big business. The Labour Party prioritised the health, well-being, livelihoods and security of ordinary people, of the 99%. It was a Labour Party that I was proud to be a part of, and I'm sure all of you were proud to be a part of. We moved conversation to the left. We built a radical manifesto. We created a vision of hope, and we inspired hundreds of thousands to get involved in politics, to campaign both locally and nationally, and to vote, many for the first time. We took on tax dodgers, we took on bad bosses, and we took on big polluters. And the fear this created amongst the ruling class, media elite, and all those who profit and benefit in maintaining the status quo was obvious. When the exploiters lash out in the way that they did, we know that we're winning. It may not have happened for us this time, but our chance will come again. And this is why it is so critical that we have a new generation at the helm to lead us in the right direction. And that's why I'm here today speaking out for this slate. Jess, Lamar, Fraser, Nabeela, Michaela, Kat, Shannon, Kiva, Mohammed, Connor, Patricia, Nakisa, Daisy, Annie, Lewis. I'm sure I've missed a couple of names. I'm too old to vote now, but if I could vote, I would be voting for that lot. They are trade unionists. They are young people who've worked precarious jobs. They are young people who have been impacted by years of austerity on our education system. These are young people who've stood up, spoken out and fought back. And they fought for equality. They fought for fairness, be it on a picket line, at a rally, at a march, by setting up a mutual aid organisation during the coronavirus pandemic, by getting involved in grassroots campaigns, be that for housing, workers' rights, the climate. These young people have stood up. These young people have led the way, and you need to vote for these young people. So during the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen public support for many 2017 and 2019 Labour policies and left ideas surge. Things we were told were silly or unaffordable at the last election have become mainstream conversation points. The idea of our carers, cleaners, refuse collectors ever being called low-skilled, again, is outrageous, and the majority of people want to see them rewarded with a pay rise and better terms and conditions. For me, I think the Labour for a Green New Deal campaign that I'm involved in, and the Green New Deal in general, has been one of the biggest uniting factors for the left, and it needs to continue to be so. And you can go online and you can read up all about these candidates, and most of them mention the climate emergency. They know that it's coming, they know that they need to stand up and fight, and you need to vote for them. The answer to the current crisis is a stimulus programme, not more austerity. We need mass intervention to create secure, well-unionised green jobs. We need to strategically tackle the high rates of unemployment that we're likely to see post-pandemic, that we're already seeing actually mid-pandemic. And we need to help in the fight to protect our planet at the same time. The climate emergency is not a joke. But environmental activism hasn't always felt necessarily accessible. It's sometimes felt a little bit exclusive, a little bit guilt-trippy, a little bit preachy and middle class. This is different. We're not blaming people here for using plastic straws. We're not saying that everybody has to go vegetarian, telling people off for not shopping organic or not having solar panels or driving an electric car. This vision of a Green New Deal is one that is worker-led. And a lot of these young people, I'll keep repeating, who you need to vote for are trade unionists, and they understand that. So instead of attacking those who work in carbon-heavy industries, the focus here needs to be on a just transition, moving the economy towards a more sustainable model and rebuilding new hubs across the UK focused on the renewables sector. On this front, the current government is failing, and I think we can probably all agree on that. Fife is a great example of this. It's an area of Scotland that could easily have become the global hub of wind turbine technology. But instead, the government failed to protect workers or jobs and sold projects to EDF and other foreign firms. 100 jobs alone were lost when one contract was outsourced to Indonesia. We should all be asking why we're paying a fortune in taxes to subsidise green energy and create jobs everywhere but here. But with the structure of a proper Green New Deal, led by a new generation of working class socialists at the helm, we have the ability to demand these things collectively and on large scale. I'm going to wrap up there because I think that my time is nearly up. I set a timer on my phone, but please, please, please vote for the For a Socialist Future slate. And I'm so proud to speak on their behalf tonight.
Thank you so much, Lauren. That was incredible. You can keep an eye out on our Twitter, where we're going to be talking about some of our environmental pledges and how we would like to ensure that we're pushing for an internationalist Green New Deal in our Young Labour platform. So next up, we have an MP who's been making waves in Parliament since she's been elected, and we really hope to see more voices like her in the future. So we've got the wonderful Apsana Begum, who is going to speak to us next about the impact of austerity on young people and fighting back from Westminster to our local communities.
Thank you so much, Daisy, and greetings to everybody on the call today. I just want to start by saying that as a member of Parliament, I've been really excited and thrilled to kind of see the leadership that young people across the country have shown over the summer, over the A-levels fiasco. That campaigning that really invigorated the debate around how education is really delivered in this country, and the leadership actually that was failing us over the summer. And that's something that I think we should all pat ourselves on the back for, because that was incredible. That activity and that U-turn that was achieved was done by young people taking steps, bold steps of leadership over the summer. I want to, as you've sort of said, Daisy, talk a bit about the impact of austerity on young people. And in a lot of ways, I think many people on this call will understand the term the austerity generation, and really understand that actually, from the tuition fees being cut to, welfare being drawn back, that it's really the case that so many young people now have grown up in austerity. And what does that really mean right now in terms of the recession and in terms of, mass employment that is looming over us? We know that the current minimum wage is set at 8.72 an hour for workers over the age of 25. But actually, if you also look at a few years ago, the Tories, actually renamed the minimum wage the national living wage. They were trying to sort of revamp it and make further commitments, but actually it was actually confusing us. It was confusing us between the Tories' low minimum wage and the living wage, and also the independently assessed much higher real living wage. And what we know is essentially that the Tories' living wage is what, is something that you can't live off. And it's especially true if you are young, because built into the minimum wage is age discrimination. So for people who are aged 21 to 24, it's set at £8.20. For people aged 18 to 20, it's £6.45. And then under 18s, it's £4.55. And of course, apprentices receive a measly sort of £4.15 an hour. So, the level of real living wage calculated by the Independent Living Wage Foundation is currently set at £9.30 an hour. And, that's what everyone's wage should be at the bare minimum. That should be the starting point. And we know, in this pandemic, the support schemes, the economic support schemes, wages have been cut to even, below these levels. And we're expecting young people in particular to be expected to survive on 67% of that minimum wage, which is completely unacceptable. And so I think about it, especially in relation to, the amount of cuts that we've had over the years, the austerity that we've experienced. We see lots of outsourcing of lots of our services. And I know that for a lot of young people, the drawing back on special educational needs and disability support has also impacted them growing up. We look at the COVID pandemic right now, and we look at the fact that, there are serious issues in the way in which that particular community are getting support. And it just isn't there. It just isn't sufficient. And I know from my constituency, Popular Limehouse, we're fighting back on that. We're fighting back locally. We're fighting back nationally as well. So we're joining up with campaigns with the National Education Union, with other trade unions as well, to make sure that we stop the outsourcing of services like this that should be really tailored to young people, should be really tailored to local communities. I'm also really keen to actually talk about child poverty, because I think for a lot of us on this call, we knew about the big child poverty agenda during the Blair government. It was top of the agenda. It was revamped. It was spoken about with very different with very different language. But what we didn't see in those 10 years of education, and lifting everybody out of child poverty, a real kind of addressing of the systemic issues and the systemic structures that mean that as much as we can invest and lead to economic growth, we still are not seeing those structures, those real unequal structures, be challenged. And so, although we saw some level of improvement in child poverty, some a huge amount of investment into Sure Start centres and lots of educational initiatives, we just didn't see the level of impact that would have actually sustained progress for the long term. And essentially, we were still saying that we expect the free market to be the answer to child poverty. We still expect that the free market is going to enrich us, but actually all it did was still enrich a minority whilst wrecking millions of lives still. So we have to look at that policy, and going forward, there will be a child poverty bill that actually is presented in Parliament by the Tory government, and that probably will be an opportunity for young members like yourselves to become active and to campaign about as well, particularly as we're in a recession, particularly because we can see how young people are really left behind in this pandemic. I think, looking at the level of activity that there was during the general election, looking at the way in which lots of young Labour members were invigorated to participate in the Labour Party in particular, really means that we've got a lot to build on. And I'm really, really proud to be able to endorse and support this slate of young activists, many who I've come across through various different campaigns. And I know that Young Labour will be a real strong organising force in communities, because it's not all about what happens in Parliament. I can tell you this for sure. It's not exactly great in there, but it's also not supposed to be in a lot of ways. What we need to do is build our social movement outside of Parliament, outside of those structures, because it's real social progress and real change has been brought about by forces like yourselves outside of Parliament, outside of government, out there in our communities. And that has then resulted in so much change on policy. And we can see that even looking at right now in terms of what happened over the summer with food poverty, seeing the public campaign for that in really strong ways. And I will just end by saying this. I often hear that we've all got to work and we've all got to work for young people and their futures, and how young people are the leaders of the future. Young people are not the leaders of the future. They are the leaders of the present. You have a voice, and your voice needs to be heard right now. And we saw that very clearly and strongly during the A-levels fiasco. And I look forward to seeing more of that through this brilliant slate being elected to organise Young Labour. My support is there with you, and solidarity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Apsana. It's really, really brilliant to hear all of that. We obviously know that for so many young people have kind of been at the brunt of this austerity crisis, and we organising around issues like wages and education that's been going on recently is so important. It's something we're going to need to keep up really, really strongly into the future. So I am now going to introduce Lamar, who I hope is here now. So Lamar is our candidate for the international rep on the National Committee. So he is a brilliant activist based in Birmingham, and he is going to talk to you about kind of the struggle for socialism internationally, and kind of what we need to be doing to support other left groups across the globe.
Yeah. Hi, thanks, Daisy. Hi, so yeah, I'm Lamar. I'm going to be just a little bit quick because I've got rid of my entire speech because I've just moved house today, just living the millennial life of constantly being on the move. So yeah, I'm running for international rep, obviously on the National Committee of Young Labour. It's one of the major appeals of the last leadership was the fact that on international issues, you always knew you could trust the leadership, and they would always move in the right direction on these questions. And that's what I hope to bring to this Young Labour National Committee. As a generation raised under the crises of the Iraq War, Afghanistan War, and constantly raised in the constantly these issues are brought up, and the conflicts are always brought up as a easy way out of these issues, rather than dealing with them in a democratic, in a principled manner that someone like Corbyn would have done if he was a leader of the party in the minute. In recent weeks, the Tories have pushed an agenda of hate, of scapegoating, of nationalism, of deportation. Instead of doing this, we should be building for a Labour Party, for a Young Labour that knows that you can't avoid these issues, that can't abandon the dimension of the socialist project that is internationalism. One of the features of this would be a political education program that I think Jess has mentioned already. So this is something that's a weak point, and always a weak point for the Labour Party, and always a weak point for people coming through the party, as young people especially, brought up through the Govian education system, pretty much a colonial education system that teaches you only parts of British history that are handpicked, that put Britain in a positive light all the time. It's also Black History Month, so it's just an important feature to mention today as well. Always from the British viewpoint. But what we know is this imperial system, this colonial system defines the world we're living in today. And if we are going to build a positive future, it's something that we need to reckon with as the Young Labour, and as the Labour Party and the Labour movement in general. So on this, we should be developing knowledge on the issue of race, on the issue of class struggle, both at home and abroad, from the bus boycotts in Bristol to the Notting Hill Carnival that features as a major part of Afro-Caribbean culture, but also the racial conflict of the race riots that happened both in Cardiff, in Birmingham, in London, the 2011 riots. These all feature in that history and that the class struggle that we're still fighting today in Britain. So as I mentioned before, we're fighting an instinctual retreat into nationalism, into social conservatism, and into a reactionary economic agenda. Our slate will be fighting on all of these positions, both being unquestionably for trans rights, unquestionably for liberation questions like this. We're also fighting against an austerity agenda, but we need to fight, because we know that only through spending, only through programs of nationalisation, only through leveraging the power of the state can we bring about the change, bring about the reasonable investment that's needed to transfer what we're living through now, a period of selfishness, of hatred, to a period of collectivity. And this has just been shown in parts through the mutual aid movements that happened through the COVID-19 first wave pandemic through this summer. So yeah, that's what our slate will be fighting on. We'll also be fighting for racial justice. The BLM movement is one of the defining features of this year. An issue that was brought about through the murder of George Floyd. So the resistance to the police violence, the state violence in the US is spread across every city in the US, and of course almost every city across the globe. And of course, I and the rest of my committee stand by the radical demands that the BLM movement has put forward. Today, of course, and over this next week, we should be having our eyes focused on other international issues, primarily in South America. Bolivia at the moment are trying to vote back in the MAS party, the Movement to Socialism, in a rough translation, a party that both is a key cornerstone in whatever kind of Green New Deal we'll be facing in the future. Both as a major mining country that produces almost all the world's lithium, and with an indigenous population that is a majority, it is important that we stand by and support comrades abroad. The 5 pledges I'll be standing on quickly. I think I'm running over time a little bit. Hopefully not. Of course, as I mentioned before, to arrange regular political education and teaching of international labour issues and history. That's a cornerstone of what we're going to be doing next. To campaign with and to signpost members to the Young Labour International branch, because we've had in discussions with comrades abroad, we've realised there's challenges to people logistically. We'll be working with domestic organisations to provide support and solidarity, sometimes even, hopefully even raise funds for people that are struggling, advocate for a Green New Deal and for global justice in this Green New Deal. I'll leave it there. I think I've gone over time. Thank you, Daisy.
Thanks so much, Lamar. Just another reminder for me. So voting opens tomorrow. So don't forget to vote for your chair, an international candidate, your regional rep, if you're under 18, an under 18 rep, and if you're registered with the party as a student, you get 3 votes to elect 3 student reps. So you'll receive an email from Labour outlining how to vote in the Young Labour elections. So make sure you get your vote in as soon as possible. You can also follow our updates on Twitter at Socialist_YL and tweet your support using the hashtag #ForASocialistFuture. Also, don't forget to let 3 friends know about our campaign and get them to vote too.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that, Lamar. It's really, really important. I think a kind of real cornerstone of what the reason we're all standing and what we kind of what we believe in, is we don't want to see a Labour Party that is shy on these issues. We don't want to see a Labour Party that like won't support Black Lives Matter, and that is shy about tackling our colonial history and the issues that leaves in the present. And Young Labour really needs to step in and be clear about where we stand on these issues, and also do the work that Lamar's been talking about of providing education where our kind of mainstream systems fail to talk about these things. So it's really, really crucial that we kind of all support these things, and obviously support Lamar for International Officer to kind of lead on these issues. So we have only 2 speakers left. Thank you so much for kind of staying all this time. So up next, we've got someone I'm really, really proud to be standing on a slate with. So Patricia is the candidate for Scotland Rep on the Young Labour National Committee. And she is going to talk to you today about kind of regional issues in Young Labour, how she represents Scotland, and also supporting justice for trans members in the Labour Party.
Yes, so hi, my name is Patricia Johnston. I'm standing for Young Labour Scotland Rep, and I want to build a socialist future in all of our nations and regions. So I was politicised by my experience of trans healthcare in this country. So like a decade of Tory austerity has created unbearable, multi-year waiting lists for treatment, and a system just designed to stop you getting what you need. So initially I wrote to like my local health board, MPs, MSPs, but one voice is really easy to ignore. But I soon realised that I wasn't alone in the struggle against austerity. Like, these struggles are connected, and I realised that I had the solidarity of the socialist left and the trade union movement. So I joined Scottish Labour, and I started campaigning for a Corbyn government. So last December, I ran canvassing sessions in the freezing rain twice a day, 6 days a week. And never before had I seen so many enthusiastic young people united in the struggle for a socialist future. I was really heartbroken, though, to see so many of these young people leave under the new leadership. They were disgusted by inaction on racism and transphobia, as well as the refusal to support trade unions and victims of state violence. I'm putting myself forward for Scotland Rep, because to rebuild, we need a party and a youth wing with actual principles. That means taking action against transphobia in our party, even when it comes from elected reps. That means standing up for socialist policies like public ownership and the green industrial revolution that Lauren was talking about. That means supporting young socialist talent, so MPs like Zara Sultana, Apsana Begum, and Bella Ribiero-Eddy aren't the exception, but the norm in our party. And that means a youth wing that stands up for its members, whether the leadership likes it or not. So I want to build a youth wing that can train the next generation of socialist activists and trade unionists so that we have a Labour Party fit for a socialist future. That's what I want to do for Scottish Young Labour, and I really hope you'll support me for Young Labour Scotland Rep. And if that sounds good, you should elect the full socialist future slate to the Young Labour National Committee. So you'll get an email, you'll basically get your ballot in the email, like starting tomorrow. And it's really easy. You just go to the website. You can vote for your regional rep, vote Jess Barnard for chair, vote Lara McNeil for youth rep, vote Nabeela, Fraser, and Michaela for student reps if you're a student, and vote Lamar for international rep. And yeah, thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. And I'm so proud to be standing on this slate with so many amazing young socialists.
Thank you so much, Patricia. That's really important. Yeah, I'd like to echo your point about the kind of heartbreak of seeing young members that we know campaign so tirelessly in 2019. I've spoken to quite a lot of people who've been so disappointed at the kind of inaction within the party about like transphobia, racism, and all of these issues. So it's really, really sad to see people leaving, but hopefully kind of if, a young Labour that can show that we support these issues, can kind of show our solidarity in action, hopefully can kind of prevent further losses and maybe even encourage people to come back. So is Owen here? Or am I amazing. Hello. So last but not least, we're going to hear from the fantastic Owen Jones. Again, just a final reminder that voting opens tomorrow. You need to tweet your support with the hashtag, use our Twibbon, which we've got now, very fancy. Tell your friends about the campaign, and share within your local young Labour groups as well. So yeah, you'll get an email tomorrow. That's the last time I'm going to remind you about that one. But yeah, now we get to hear from Owen, so take it away.
Well, firstly, it's a huge honour to be here on this platform with what an incredible array of speakers, people I regularly fanboy on the cheeky TL. Absolutely incredible, courageous, socialist candidates. It is everyone's duty, if you're young enough, which I'm not. I don't think I can even get away with making jokes about looking like Macaulay Culkin in Home Alone anymore, but people are actually young to fight for, to vote for these absolutely phenomenal fighters for socialism, fighters for transformative policies that younger people in particular, but all of society need more than ever. So vote early, vote often. That's not for any Labour Party compliance officers who are being overly stringent. That isn't to be taken literally. So what I'm going to talk about, I think we've heard these absolutely incredible speakers. We've got now a new generation of young left leaders, and they are leaders in Parliament already, and they are our future. And we need to get more of those in Parliament. But we also need to get on across every layer, every section of the party, young, dynamic, rooted, courageous fighters for socialism, like those standing who we've all got to vote for and tweet our support for, and spread the word and go on WhatsApp and tell everyone in our networks to go and support. And what I was going to talk about is I just think some of my thoughts about where we are, because it's been a hell of a year, to say the least. 2020 is not necessarily a year that any of us are going to look back to with the hugest amount of fondness. But I think it is important where we think about this particular crisis, the biggest crisis since World War II, because what the coronavirus crisis showed, it exposed and exacerbated injustices that don't just scar our society, but define it. Remember when we applauded every Thursday the key workers who, including Tory ministers, who had repeatedly voted to slash their services, slash their wages and salaries, attack their pensions, privatise the services they work for, and denigrate, including the right-wing media. These key workers who we rightly all of a sudden spoke about as key workers, without whom society cannot function, underpaid and undervalued, whether it be the gig economy and self-employed workers who, again, it was exposed how they were always one pay packet from 1 month away from penury, a social security system which can barely be called that, a shredded safety net in place of a proper, adequate, functioning welfare state, where people who, come on, Rickman, get involved. Rickman's getting involved. Come on here, Rickman. Where people who, what does Rickman think? Where people had been told through the Daily Mail and elsewhere how generous the welfare state was, and it was providing this luxurious existence, suddenly were sucked into the orbit of universal credit with a derisory sum of money that nobody in a society, in a wealthy society, should ever be condemned to live on. Whether it be a care system, a social care system, privatized and fragmented, in which the pandemic was allowed to let rip, with a government which, I mean, we often talk about the incompetence of the way they've dealt with the pandemic. And yeah, obviously it's been astonishingly shambolic. But what's often been missing from this whole discussion is actually the biggest disasters of the way they've handled this, it's not been about incompetence. It's been about ideology, about the fact that they didn't lock down quick enough because they believed that it would be damaging for the economy and the business interests in practice that actually funded them. And obviously that in practice meant a worse outbreak, tens of thousands of people dying, unnecessary deaths, and an even worse economic hit than should have been the case. The fact that they then forced people, they drove people back to pubs and eat out to help out, and then on the front page of the Telegraph said, if you don't go back to your offices, you risk being sacked. Without a proper test and trace system in place, because they handed it to their private sector mates who have had the most catastrophic failure in a test and trace system, which if it had been functioning, we wouldn't be now in this disastrous mess of a second wave. This was about ideology. It was about a conservative party that puts business interests and economic interests ahead of human life itself. And that is the social order that we live in. It's a social order that prioritizes profit and economic interest above of human life in a rotten social order which doesn't pay key workers properly, with an inadequate excuse for a welfare state where self-employed and gig economy workers have precarious and often living standards which don't allow them to support them and their families, with public services which were not in any way prepared for this pandemic, and a lack of PPE because of years of austerity. This was ideological. This was about putting business interests ahead of human life. And that is why tens of thousands of people, 1 in every 1,000 people, died during this pandemic in the first wave because of what the government did. And that just shows that what the system we live under, it can't work. It won't work. It can't be just trimmed around the edges and just slightly humanized and tweaked here and there. The whole social order, we've seen the deaths of tens of thousands of people, not just because of the government's approach, but because of a society that prioritizes profit and business interests above human life. And that's why we need a transformative agenda which creates an entirely new society, which is what everybody here, everybody standing for election, is committed to, and the MPs that we have on the left are absolutely committed to. Now, I know people feel battered and bruised, and we lived through the calamity of last December, and we barely had time to mourn and to grieve before we're, a leadership election, then thrown into this pandemic. But we do have to think, actually, that we've got to remember that we're stronger than sometimes we give ourselves credit for. There are now more left MPs as a proportion of the Parliamentary Labour Party than there've been for about 4 decades. And in a future Labour government, they will have the balance of power. Whether it be the fact that we've got a membership which is overwhelmingly backs the policies and the ideas that many of us have fought for our entire lives. The fact we have momentum and other such organisations which are infinitely stronger. I remember working for John McDonnell in 2005 onwards, and my word, the Labour left barely existed. It was just a joke. It was just, I remember the conferences we had, where it'd be a few, predominantly, not to be ageist, but not many young people in the room, and it was just the same people you'd always see over and over again, downhearted, defeated, and all the rest. We are much stronger now in the unions, in the membership, in the Parliamentary Labour Party than we often give ourselves credit for. And what we need to do now is fight to get more people selected as councillors and as members of Parliament, including the very people who are already standing for election, and many of the people watching this now, no pressure, but the future of the left, the Labour movement, and indeed the future of this country is at stake. And in terms of, we've seen battles recently which have been mortifyingly depressing. The fact that the Labour Party failed to stand up for human rights abuses abroad, and the most basic violation of human rights here, not voting against conservative legislation, legalising undercover state agents, torturing, raping and murdering the citizens of our own country. And I've interviewed, and very few things have had such an impact on me is interviewing women who had relationships with undercover police officers, who, of course, had created entirely fake identities, and they had long-standing relationships with them. That the most unbelievably invasive, as one woman said, who had a child with one, bit like being raped by the state. The fact that the Labour Party could not vote against that is a matter of shame. But when we see these battles and we think to ourselves, well, what's the point? We've got to remember that we've got millions of people on our side across society. We've got a mass membership, the unions, momentum, and particularly younger people who are committed to fighting for those policies and those ideas. Now, Keir Starmer, of course, stood on 10 pledges, including increasing taxes on the rich to invest in the economy, scrapping tuition fees, public ownership, no illegal wars, a green industrial revolution. And it is our duty and indeed our responsibility to hold the leadership to account for the promises that they made, indeed the very democratic mandate that underpins their leadership. You know, it's not like they can say to us, well, you lost, go and die in a ditch somewhere. Those are the policies they won the leadership on. And it is our responsibility to make sure they stick to the democratic mandate on which they were elected, which are popular across society. Labour didn't lose the election in December because people thought to themselves, oh, I really value my privatised rip-off rail system. They didn't think to themselves, oh, well, you know, rich people are ever so hard done by. I don't think we should be asking them to pay a bit more tax. It wasn't because they thought to themselves, well, actually, I think young people should be punished with debt for daring to dream for a university education. These, of course, weren't the reasons Labour lost. And of course, I think we could all rehearse over and over again many of the reasons they did. It wasn't those policies. It wasn't that transformative agenda. I don't remember arguing with a single person. I traveled the whole country, arguing with me on the doorstep about, leave those rich people alone, you bastards. That didn't happen. So we have to have the confidence and the determination to stand by the policies which were established as the mainstream of the Labour Party, and indeed the current leadership won a leadership election by promising they'd stick to those policies. And it's up to us to hold them to account and fight for those policies and fight for representatives across the Labour Party who are committed to fighting and supporting that. And the reason as well, I mean, we think about coronavirus and this unbelievable calamity that we've gone through, but this is a dress rehearsal for another calamity, a much bigger calamity that is coming our way, and that's the climate emergency. And we've seen that the state is able to intervene, though not anywhere near sufficiently, but it is able to galvanize huge resources to act in an emergency. And we have to fight. This isn't just a fight to build a just society free of oppression and exploitation. We're fighting for the survival of the human species itself, with a green industrial revolution that will create jobs, skilled, decent jobs, improve living standards, expand affordable public transport under state control, expand renewable energy, produce cleaner air. We could go on. That these are the policies and the ideas which are not just about making us a more equal and just society, in which people are no longer held back by the injustices that define British society, but about saving the planet itself from a capitalist system which puts profit ahead of the very survival of the human species. So that is what these are the stakes that we all have to fight for. And the other thing I'd say is, again, when we feel depressed and down and all the rest of it, the fact is, and this is a big difference, in 1983, Margaret Thatcher won the youth vote. This generational divide in politics is new. It's not something which existed in the past. And the fact is, younger people, because of their the collapse, the housing crisis, the disappearance of skilled jobs, being saddled with debt, the half of younger people who go to university, the attack on their youth services, on public services, on their social security, as well as the progressive values that so many of them hold dear on issues like racism, on homophobia, on transphobia, on women's rights, on immigration, on the rights of migrants. All of these things mean that we have more support for the ideas that we believe in amongst younger people than ever. And it's up to us to organize and give hope and leadership to them. And it's also critical for people within the Labour Party. And there will be this debate, and this is a debate that we need to avoid becoming acrimonious, where some say, the battle is over in the Labour Party. Why should I waste my energy and time? And obviously we want people to do that. But if they're not able to throw their energy into extra parliamentary movements like Black Lives Matter, like the climate change, the climate justice movement, like private tenants, like, I was on the picket line of tape workers fighting for their jobs. If we have these strong extra parliamentary movements and people in the Labour Party who are sympathetic and supportive of them, that will allow us to build more space in public opinion and put pressure on the Labour leadership from within and without to have a genuine, radical, transformative agenda to build a new society. And just before I wrap up, there's something else I want to talk about quickly because it's something I'm very passionate about. Labour handled badly anti-Semitism and the issue of anti-Semitism in the party. And it strikes me now that rather than learning from those lessons, the Labour Party, which is an institutionally transphobic organisation, is failing to stand up for our trans siblings and is failing at the moment at every level to take seriously, to make the Labour Party a space where trans people feel accepted, where it's a place that's inclusive. And that scourge of transphobia is another thing which I know many of the people standing are so passionate and committed to, including trans candidates. And it's absolutely critical that we fight for a Labour Party that unequivocally, no ifs, no buts, stands with trans people and makes it clear to every transphobe in the party, you are not welcome, and action will be taken against transphobes just as it should be taken against anti-Semites. And that's another battle we should fight. But just to wrap up, this remains the battle of our lives. And the policies that we believe in a time of crisis, where they're going to try and make working people pay for a crisis that was made unnecessarily catastrophic by a Conservative Party that put profit ahead of people's lives. They're trying to do the same thing as they did after the bankers crash, make working people and younger people and disabled people and marginalized communities pay for a crisis they had absolutely nothing to do with. And that is why we must demand that it is those at the top of society, those who are still booming like never before, the billionaires who have increased their wealth during this deadly pandemic as tens of thousands of people died horrible deaths in this country. Those are the people who must pay to invest in building a new country. That we don't go back to where we were before, which is not what people want in this country. That we use this as an opportunity to transform our economy with a green industrial revolution, so that as the jobs that are destroyed by the calamity of the economic crisis we're now going through are replaced with skilled, secure jobs through a green industrial revolution, that we have a mass housing program, a council house building program, the council housing of a better standard than private housing, which is what Nye Bevan did after World War II. That we stop young people being saddled with debt for daring to dream to a university education. That we bring our utilities and services under the democratic public ownership of the people of this country. This is socialism. We're going to fight for a society that puts our needs and our lives ahead of profit of those at the top. And that's socialism, the democratization of society, of politics, of the economy, of the workplace, of building that society where we're no longer at the whim of private interests, the corporate interests at the top who keep plunging this crisis, this country into crisis after crisis, walking away whistling as migrants and refugees and Muslims are forced to be scapegoated by our reactionary media in the aftermath. We've got to keep fighting, just as our ancestors fought against far greater odds, those who fought for the welfare state, for women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and against racism. So let's have the same courage. Let's have the same determination. We have amazing candidates who we have to fight for, get them elected, and then get some of them in time elected into Parliament as the new leaders of the future, just as we've already got these inspiring, as we've had in this call, inspiring MPs who we've already got elected. We've got so much to fight for, so much to be optimistic about, so much to feel determined about, and we should relish the battles coming up ahead, because we are going to build a new society. We're taking the scenic route at the moment, I accept, but we are going to get there. So have hope, have determination, have resilience. Let's get even more inspiring people standing within the Labour Party to fight for these ideas. I'm proud to support the people on this slate. We're going to get them elected, and then we're going to get more and more young people elected into Parliament. And one day, those are the people who are going to be running this country and building socialism in Britain in alliance with the extra parliamentary movements and people from below. So keep fighting, have determination, comrades, and let's do this.
Thank you so much, Owen. That was brilliant. Really need some kind of hope and inspiration, but resilience at the moment. So thank you so much to Owen and all of our speakers. I'm just going to hand back over to Jess, who is going to just close off for this evening. But thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's been absolutely incredible, and we're absolutely overwhelmed with all the support we've got. Couldn't have asked for anything more. But yeah, I'm just going to hand over to Jess, who will finish up for this evening.
Thank you, Daisy. Thanks for being a brilliant chair, and obviously thank you to all of our incredible speakers tonight. We as a group of young activists are
Jess, I think there's a issue with your volume. I don't know if it's the stream or your mic, but I can't actually hear what you're saying. Can people hear me, or is it just Jess's? Is it just Jess's mic? Just Jess. Okay. So while we get that sorted, just going to give a final reminder of everything that you've got to do tomorrow. So ballots will be sent to you by email. They'll be sent to you along with the NEC candidates. And you can obviously check out who Momentum has been supporting from that on their Twitter and social media profiles. So obviously make sure you follow us on Twitter, tweet out your support. It's really, really important when you vote. If you make sure you send a screenshot of that you're voting for us, to share around, because kind of the more engagement we get on social media, the better. It's really, really helpful. Oh, sorry. Yeah, also, if you make sure you're kind of sharing around with all your friends, all your young Labour groups, and also really important, who we haven't had here this evening, Lara McNeil is standing for the Youth Rep on the National Executive Committee. She has sat on the committee for the last 2 years, and it's been an absolutely incredible voice for young members within the party. So really make sure you re-elect her, and she'll continue to represent us in the NEC. I think Jess is ready to come back in, so I'm going to pass back over to her.
Hopefully you can hear me now. Can you hear me? I'll take that as a yes. Sorry about that. You can't really get through these things without a technical hitch, so it was only right. Just a big thank you again to all of our speakers tonight. So we as a group of young activists are overwhelmed to have had such incredible support from titans of our Labour movement. And alongside the speakers tonight, various members of our team being supported by lots of MPs, including Bell and Jeremy himself, and of course, support of thousands of young members across our movement. So thank you so much. Both myself, Lara, and the Socialist Future slate have been to hundreds of young Labour events, taken lots of calls, been to hustings, and we couldn't have been prouder to have had the opportunity to speak about our vision and meet the young people that make our movement, that are out in their community every single day fighting for justice. So thank you to every young member who has organised these events, attended these events, and if you would like to meet us and have a chat with us and haven't had a chance yet, do get in touch. You can find all of us on Twitter, and our emails can be sent round as well. So To those of you engaging for the first time, I hope that we have inspired you to continue being active in Young Labour and making sure that young people have a voice in Young Labour in your community. So stay active in the Labour Party and get active in Young Labour if you haven't already, because we are the voice for change and young people. At the start of this pandemic, we saw Young Labour members mobilise instinctively to protect communities and those shielding from COVID-19. And young people really demonstrated that we will do everything we can to support our communities, and we make up COVID-19 response teams. We stepped in as shop workers, and our existing shop workers continue to work despite having no PPE to keep our shelves stocked and keep people fed. Young people work in the NHS and overwhelmingly united to protect people and serve our National Health Service. And despite that, we see that the Tories still aim to lay the blame at young people's door. They continue to attack our human rights, and they continue to push us into debt and dismantle our education system. We can't let this continue. So more than ever, we need to push back. And it's our responsibility as the young members of the Labour Party to lead this movement. So stand by our transformative policies. Organise in our communities and make sure you unite with us for a socialist future. Thank you so much to everyone who's tuned in tonight to listen to us, but also thank you to every young person in this country that's fighting for a fairer society, and we look forward to standing shoulder to shoulder with you. So voting opens tomorrow, October the 19th. Make sure you check your email. You should find your ballot paper in there. You can vote for myself as chair. You can vote for Lara McNeil as your NEC youth rep. You can vote for Lamar Campbell as your international rep. You will each have a regional rep you can vote for, and you can find out their details on the Socialist Future website. And you can also vote for an under 18s rep if you're under 18, and a student rep if you're 3 student reps if you're registered as a student with the Labour Party. So make sure you use all your votes to deliver a socialist future. Check your emails, cast your votes, tweet your support with the hashtag Socialist Future, and tell 3 friends to vote for a socialist future. Thank you so much, and solidarity.
Perfect. Thanks for wrapping that one up, Jess. So that's all we've got time for this evening. Thanks for sitting through it with us. I'm sure you are just as inspired by the amazing speakers we've had as I am. So we're not going to bore you for any longer, but remember that ballots open tomorrow, and they're open for about 3 weeks. So it's a long voting period, but obviously the first few days are crucial. So keep up the support, and thank you so much everyone for coming. And that's it from me.
Young people have lived most of our lives under Tory governments that inflict austerity on our communities, scapegoat migrants, and fuel the climate crisis.
Now we face another recession, soaring unemployment, and a pandemic out of control.
We don't just need the Labour Party to win the next election. We need a party that will end these crises, end these cruel policies, and build a better society.
We need policy as radical as reality, not half measures or piecemeal reforms.
Only socialism can address this failing system head on and put an end to crisis and insecurity.
This means embracing Black Lives Matter, not dismissing it.
It means taking back the wealth and power that working people have built.
It means abolishing tuition fees and making education free and accessible cradle to grave.
It means a Green New Deal that puts power in the hands of workers.
It means bringing mail, rail, energy and water into democratic public ownership.
It means opposing Tory legislation that decriminalises war crimes and torture and not abstaining.
Because Labour won't win by going soft on the Tories.
We won't win by turning our back on the trade union movement that built our party.
We won't win by returning to the days of abstaining on a hostile environment, on Tory welfare cuts, or on austerity.
We won't win by embracing imperialism, racist policing, or transphobic rhetoric.
Labour wins when we take on the billionaire class and the political establishment and show that together we can transform society in the interests of working people.
We're going to build a young Labour that works towards this.
A young Labour that's a campaigning presence in our communities, winning power at the ballot box and on the picket line.
A young Labour that organises young people in their trade unions.
Mobilises young people behind the Black Lives Matter movement.
To fight for trans rights.
To fight for climate justice.
Fight against evictions and extortionate rents.
Young Labour has one job: to fight for a socialist future, and we are the people to do it.